Hey, everybody. So now I'm going to just welcome to the stage the great Enrique Santos, who some of you may know from everywhere in TV and radio. So Mr. Santos will be moderating our excellent panel today.
Muchas gracias, Valentina.
Gracias a
La
usted.
presentación de hoy va a ser totalmente en español con subtítulos en inglés. The presentation will be in Spanish with subtitles in English. I'm kidding. Welcome, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Gracias, Valentina. Like she said, I am a host with Univision Radio and TV. And I'm honored to be here specifically as we're celebrating Hispanic heritage until October 15th, of course. So with that same spirit, and felicidades for discovering Español. Ángela, great work. How about a round of applause for discovering Español? Great work with this documentary, really, which is eye-opener. Let's welcome to the stage one by one, and then we're going to get to meet all our panelists. And then we're going to open up the microphone so that you guys can ask questions. So don't be bashful. Let's have fun. Ask away. We're also live on whitehouse.gov. We are live streaming. And if anybody watching the live stream has a question, you can tweet your questions with the hashtag MyBrothersKeeper, of course. My Brother's Keeper. Let's, in the spirit of why we're here, and with my Brother's Keeper, let's welcome Brandon Menjares. He's a youth leader. Brandon. Melenka Clark with the Department of Justice, Criminal Justice and Community Reform. Melenka. Reverend Gabriel Salguero, founder of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, and we saw his beautiful work in the documentary. Reverend, welcome. Muchas gracias. From the beautiful state of Arizona, from the city of Phoenix, Councilwoman Kate Gallego, welcome, District 8. Michael Smith, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Cabinet Affairs for My Brother's Keeper. Michael, welcome. We missing anybody? We just have an extra chair.
We have an extra chair.
Anybody want to sit in that chair? So I think we should start with Brandon. Again, I mentioned you're the reason, you are like the poster child, really, of what the president's initiative is with My Brother's Keeper. Tell us a little bit about your experience. I know you had a very rough childhood. Your biological parents passed. Your biological parents abandoned you, and then it was your adopted parents that died tragically, correct? So that was very rough for you.
So my name is Brandon Menjares, 23 years old. I'm a graduate of Youth Build Justice Start. That's based out of Cambridge. So I was abandoned as a child. I was a week old. I was adopted to a Puerto Rican family. I've always identified as a Latino. I've always felt empowered by that. In my community of Chelsea, it's a safe haven for immigration, so you can't get deported there. It's, I want to say, 80% Latino. And so my Youth Build program is composed of 90% Latino and Spanish background. So what Youth Build done for me, it's been a transformative experience. I came in with no self-confidence whatsoever, lack of structure within my own life, and within my community there was none. So Youth Build was really a transformative experience for me. It gave me the skills and the abilities that I need to be able to further myself within the world. Through Youth Build, I was able to open doors, not only gain employability skills and personal development. I'm sitting here with you all, for starters, right? So Youth Build is more than just a program. It's more than just a nonprofit. It's a way of life. I carry the Youth Build spirit with me every day, in and out. Each one teach one. I currently work at a youth center in Cambridge, for the city of Cambridge, where I use the skills that I've learned in Youth Build every day. So through Youth Build, I'm able to reciprocate what I've learned in Youth Build in my youth center. So not only have I been empowered, I'm able to empower others, other young folks, show them the way out, show them the way out of poverty. You're able to see things differently. I like to give an example. So if you're driving down the street and there's only that one lane in front of you, you have no other option but to go that one way, right? What Youth Build did was open other lanes. So you're able to go other ways and see other ways of doing these things. Other people in your community see these other way of doing things when they knew you were just on that one lane, and they say, hey, maybe I could go on that other lane too. And so they do. And so what happens is your pipeline extends into other people's pipelines, and there's just plenty of pipelines.
Excellent. Give him a round of applause. And we'll get to Brandon in just a little bit. Brandon, if you wouldn't mind passing the mic over to Malenka. Malenka with the Department of Justice. And Malenka, if you can tell us why you're so proud of your work and how the Department of Justice, if you just briefly,
Sure.
just an overall.
Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's really such a pleasure to share the stage with all of you and to be able to watch that inspiring film earlier today. So I'm from the Office of Community-Oriented Policing, which is a grant-making component within the Department of Justice, whose mission is to advance the practice of community policing. Lots of people like to know what that is. It is the way we conceive of it, it's an operational philosophy that really looks to transformational partnerships between the community and law enforcement to co-produce public safety. So it's really about engaging the community in problem solving and you know, it's not just, you know, a small thing that you do on the side. It's really how you orient everything that you do in terms of picking crime strategies, how you do your hiring, what you do around recruiting, who you include in training. So it's very much a holistic philosophy. We do that through providing funding, first of all, to increase capacity of law enforcement agencies to hire police officers that can engage in this work. And we actually just recently gave Phoenix almost over $3 million, in fact, to hire 25 officers. So we're happy to do that, along with many other agencies. We also provide support for training and technical assistance and do a number of publications that are sort of can be leveraged to the field to figure out sort of what are good strategies for implementing community policing along a full spectrum of different topic areas. So one thing I wanted to talk about, though, that has been sort of recently involved the COPS office in something for which I'm extraordinarily proud, and that is supporting the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So back in December, in the wake of the unrest after Ferguson and the Michael Brown shooting, the President called for a task force to be convened to really look at this issue of policing and how best to advance community policing and build and strengthen the relationships of trust with the community. And in doing that, he called together 11 leaders and a very diverse group of people. So there were police chiefs on this task force, there were academics, there were activists, very importantly, there were youth activists fresh off the protest lines in New York and Ferguson, union representatives from the law enforcement field. So really just, you know, a wonderful kind of microcosm of the different perspectives around these issues. And to be honest, we weren't sure where everything was going to land, because what was being asked of them was to come up with consensus recommendations for a blueprint on sort of how to advance this agenda. So we worked with them. We supported them through hosting a number of listening sessions throughout the country where I talked about the diversity of the task force members. They in turn heard from a full gamut of different voices to talk about the issues, the concerns that communities had with law enforcement, the challenges that law enforcement agencies are facing. So all different perspectives. We had an entire panel just based on youth perspectives that talked very specifically about the concerns that they had and sort of positive and negative experiences that they had with law enforcement. And that all is surfaced through the final report, which I actually brought as a show and tell. This is my dog-eared copy that I travel around with in my bag. But if anyone is interested, you should certainly just Google Task Force Report, and you can actually get this sent to wherever you are. We're very much
Hopefully that's not the only copy, right?
This is not the only copy. But you'll see that when the task force report was released, it has it has 59 recommendations actually around a range of topics: building community trust, community policing and crime reduction, officer safety and wellness, training and education, technology and social media. As you can see, it's a very sort of cover the field type of report. And again, it has a number of, I mean, you know, the sort of interactions with youth and the importance of getting these relationships right is infused throughout the report. But there are some very specific recommendations, including recommendations around the advances in research that have been made around adolescent development, neurological underpinnings of brain development. There's lots more information that's available so that can also help inform law enforcement as they are dealing with youth. There's a number of recommendations around school resource officers and the interactions in schools so that we're not pushing folks into what everybody understands to be called the school to prison pipeline, but really being thoughtful about appropriate responses to you know, what can generally be just acting up in school. So happy to, in the Q&A, to talk more about some of the specific recommendations, but it's a terrific report. And most importantly, when the report was presented to the president, he said very clearly, this is not a document that's going to stand on the shelf. I want to see this picked up and implemented throughout the country. And it's been incredible to see the momentum and activity around that. So we actually hosted an event right here in the White House, bringing jurisdictions, 30 or 40 jurisdictions that brought their mayors and police chiefs and community members, including young people, to talk about what they were doing in terms of implementing these recommendations. We're actually working on a playbook to help operationalize these recommendations to make it very easy, sort of like a how-to. What, you know, we've got these great recommendations. How are we going to get this pushed forward in our particular community? The COPS office has a number of grants, as I mentioned, and some that were just released, but also some that specifically focus on implementation of the task force recommendations. And one of the awards that we just announced on Friday is going to Howard University, and that's focused on how to engage millennials, particularly millennials of color, in the conversation around interactions with the police, but also really how to recruit diverse candidates for law enforcement. So they're going to do a number of focus groups to get that information, and also get information about, you know, strategies for engaging youth in the co-production of public safety. That's all in there.
Excellent. Someone who's done a phenomenal job also on the implementation of the president's initiative is Reverend Gabriel Salguero. I know this is very dear to him. We saw him again in the documentary a couple minutes ago. And you hosted watch parties, several hundred watch parties in different churches throughout the nation.
Well, first, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, and so glad to be at the White House for this. Yeah, I think that for us, what's important is to get the story out about the promise of these young men and boys. In our coalition, the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, there are about 8 million Hispanic evangelicals in the United States, and our coalition serves 3,000 churches. And so when they called us to partner with Discovery and Discovery in Espanol, and it's really about the young men, right? And we said, if we can be an echo chamber for that. And for us, the Latino church is a gathering place. So we have police officers who worship in our church. We have teachers who worship in our church. We have superintendents who worship in our church. And we have hundreds of young people, Latino boys and young men. And so for us, we are a natural convening place, a natural partner where we can recruit mentors, where we can advocate for reform in education so that young boys and men of color are not disproportionately impacted by punitive measures in education, as our colleague here said about the kind of school to prison pipeline. I think that, and so we're doing several things. One is we're educating the Latino church on what they can do. The second thing is we're advocating for reform around educational policy, around making sure young boys and men can read by 3rd grade, around proper vocational training. So education and then third, we're mobilizing our men to mentor other young boys and men. This is personal to me, Enrique. You know, my father learned to read in prison. He was a high school dropout. And, you know, as the president said in his thing, it's poor choices. And he didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. He didn't live in a community where there were, right? And so the church, the Hispanic evangelical community and other communities, mosque and synagogues and indigenous tribal settings, they're the wraparound services. We have after-school programs. We have education. So those several hundred watch parties that we had for the premiere was about, hey, this is not just a problem, it's an opportunity. And these young men, you got to believe in them. I think in the film I said they have an inner beauty, and all we're doing is calling it out. So I don't use the phrase at risk. I use the phrase at promise. Maybe it's my faith speaking through. So my father, a woman came. She taught him how to read from La Reina Valera 1960, which is equivalent to the King James Version in English. It's the these and the thous. And then he went to Teen Challenge, and then he turned his life around. He went to Bible college. He put me and my two older brothers through college and graduate school, my sister through graduate school, and me through a PhD program. So I've seen it happen. And if I had that opportunity, I think the church, the criminal justice system, youth build, city council can work together to unleash el potencial, mis hermanos, the potential that you all have inside. And if the church is not a part of it, I see it as a stool with multiple legs. Government, private business, and NGOs, churches, and faith groups. And then also, parents and families, and surrogate parents, and foster parents and educators. And if we all four work together, we're going to see incredible change. And that's why I joined My Brother's Keeper.
Excellent. Let me borrow this mic here. Councilwoman, welcome.
Thank you.
This is very dear to you as well, and to your state and your beautiful city.
Absolutely. So Phoenix is proud to be a My Brother's Keeper community. We accepted the challenge over a year ago and have really been having a lot of fun with it, but it is essential to the future of Phoenix. The majority of the students in our Arizona K-12 system are Latino, and in the Phoenix Union High School District, when we get final numbers, we think it will be around 80% of our students. So the future of Phoenix and the future of our Latino community are closely tied. So we need My Brother's Keeper to be a success, and we are also investing in our women as well. And we've had a lot of great victories. So you heard we were investing in community policing and really trying to make sure our officers are out there with the community. The Corporation for National and Community Service has been a great partner for us as well. We have folks here from City Year and other affiliated programs, and that's been a part of our toolbox. Through My Brother's Keeper and the corporation, we were able to get funding to expand our programs that get young people and police officers working together, getting to know each other in social settings. So sometimes our police officers have questions for our young people, and it could be just as simple as, why do you dress that way? Or it could be more complicated questions. Like, we have a significant refugee community in the city of Phoenix, and a lot of our young refugee men will often travel together, partially because they're still learning English or a variety of other different reasons. And when we can tell our police officers those stories, it begins to make sense why they're doing what they're doing, and that understanding makes everyone safer and helps us achieve the safety goal of My Brother's Keeper. We are also really enjoying the Be Employed goal. Entrepreneurship has been one of our ways we've really reached a lot of young people, and we've partnered with the federal government through the Economic Development Authority and got some great grants and a couple organizations to do a variety of different entrepreneurial programs, including maker spaces. And you would love the things that these student entrepreneurs are coming up with. One of the ones that I loved was just a little holder for your cell phone while you plug it into a wall, so that if you need to charge on the go, you can have your cell phone not dangling from a cord. And they're great products that I would want to buy. And if our students have businesses that keep them excited, we think they're gonna be employed and succeed.
Make sure they trademark it so they can make some money on that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I should have brought samples so I could help them sell all those businesses. And we've had great support from celebrity community as well. So Shark Tank, Damon John came to Phoenix through a partnership with the Checkered Flag Run Foundation. Many of you know FUBU and some of his other businesses. And he's helping us and advising on My Brother's Keeper as well. So we're really having fun with it and trying to create a great future for Phoenix and our young men.
Excellent. Michael. You get 2 mics, Michael.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for moderating this discussion, and thank you all for being here. You heard the president, so I really don't have to say much. I could just drop the mic. The president talked all about My Brother's Keeper. I'll draw on a couple themes that he brought out. My Brother's Keeper goes back to February of 2014. And if you hear the president talk about why he wanted to create My Brother's Keeper, it's for a few different reasons. One, the idea of expanding opportunity has been the cornerstone of this administration. The president, the first lady, the vice president, Dr. Biden, believe deeply personally in this idea that America has to remain a place where you can make it if you try. If you work hard, you play by the rules, we have an opportunity as Americans to help you succeed, because we know that when you succeed, we're all inextricably linked. We all succeed together. The other thing that you would hear the president say is, you know what, sometimes no matter how hard you work, there are barriers and obstacles that we have to be honest about in the history of this nation. And we have to work together and remove those obstacles and barriers so that our young people can have a pathway to opportunity. And the last thing that you would hear him say about why he created My Brother's Keeper is this idea of not only do we have a moral obligation to make sure that our kids can succeed, but there's an economic imperative. America cannot continue to be globally competitive if we continue to just write off a whole generation of our young people. At the end of the day, our economy is based on production and consumption, and we need boys and young men of color producing at the highest levels and consuming at the highest levels. And the Council on Economic Advisors, the President's Council on Economic Advisors, just released a report that talked about the challenges that we've had. Some of you have probably heard the term disconnected youth. We have more than 6 million young people between 14 to 24, the vast majority of whom are boys and young men of color who are not in school and not working. The Council on Economic Advisors showed that if we could close the employment gap between working-age young men of color and their white male counterparts, we could see an increase in GDP by 2%. It's massive. So this is something that is not only vitally important to our heart and to this age-old principle of being your brother's keeper, but it's vitally important to the country. And so what the president did was three things. He attacked the place-based work, the policy work, and the private sector work. So with policy, the president created the My Brother's Keeper Task Force. Every single member of the cabinet that has anything to do with domestic policy, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Education, Health and Human Services, they are all responsible for reporting directly to the president on policy initiatives that can make sure that we reduce these opportunity gaps and make sure all young people, no matter where they come from, can achieve their dreams. And it's been amazing what they've done. Not only initiatives like the 21st Century Policing Task Force, but just last week we announced $76 million in grants to Youth Build, which is an increase from last year. Just a few weeks ago, the president was in Detroit launching more than $100 million in apprenticeship grants. There's been new guidance on rethinking school discipline so that we're not being stupid and suspending our pre-Ks, pre-kindergarten, high at a level of boys of color that are oftentimes being escorted out with law enforcement. And so we've released new guidance. So the policy work is incredible. On the place-based side, Phoenix is one of almost 240 My Brother's Keeper communities across the country that are investing real money, are putting out bold goals like reducing juvenile arrest, and have real plans in order to get that done. In Boston, Mayor Marty Walsh has the Mayor's Mentoring Initiative, 1,000 new mentors starting with his staff. The Street Workers Program, expanding the number of street workers. So these aren't just press releases. This is deep community building work that will far outlast January of 2017 when I leave with the president. And then lastly, on private sector, the president says that America's at its best when we are fielding a full team. And so the private sector has stepped up in a major way. There's been more than $500 million in investments announced to support My Brother's Keeper, including the launch of a new My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization which is going to invest in communities. So lots of great work, and we're just excited about seeing the needle moving on the ground in communities across the country.
Are we doing enough? Since the president announced his plan originally, are we doing enough?
I think we could always do more, right? And so I think we always have to look at ourselves and instead of waiting for the government, instead of waiting for the nonprofit, instead of waiting for the school. Young people, you could probably do more. Old people, you could probably do more. Business leaders, you could do more. So, when we started My Brother's Keeper, I would say, there were disparate efforts that were taking place across the country. And fast forward a couple years later, you see a movement that's built. But you know, if you're a shopkeeper, if you're a business owner, ask yourself, how can I make sure that I'm creating more summer jobs? How am I creating employment practices so that I am making it easier for folks that are returning maybe from being incarcerated? Making sure that I'm not holding up a stop sign, but I'm welcoming them back into employment and into the community. If I'm a young millennial, how can I be a mentor? And someone mentored me. How can I step things up? So there are lots of different ways we can all get involved. And I think the president is really calling people to action. And I think you have to start by asking yourself, what more can I do to really close this gap?
What would you guys say is the biggest challenge that, maybe that question goes for some of you in the audience that we'll get to as well, but maybe Brandon can answer. What would you say the biggest challenge of our youth is today? Councilwoman, if I can borrow that one. Thanks. You can pass that down.
Well, what I think our biggest challenge is youth, for youth is changing the lens that we're viewed in. A lot of times, and I know especially in my community, we're viewed as youth who we don't want to do nothing but bad. We don't want anything more. But the truth is that we're not allowed anything more than there's really no way to get your foot in the door, to prove that you're worthy, that you're capable, that you have the capacity for good to do change in the community. That's what I think the biggest challenge is. And as far as resilience is everything for the youth. We need to be resilient. We need to be able to pick ourselves up after we've been dropped, kicked down, tossed to the side, marginalized, what may have you. We need to be able to change the lens, the scope that we're put under, and say, no, this is not us. We can do more, and we are more.
And Reverend, that's part of our, as being a good human being, as being a good American, that should be all of our responsibility.
Yeah, look, it's not lost on me that the title of the project is from the Bible, from the book of Genesis, chapter 3. Am I my brother's keeper? And God is like, duh, yes. Of course. We're, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, that we're all in this together. And I think Michael Smith from the White House is clear that we all have stake in this game. That how future generations will live it's important. It's a moral imperative. It's an economic imperative. It's an educational imperative. The question is, I have two boys, and I was talking to the mayor of Newark. My boys go to school in Newark, and I pastor in New York City. And he has a program, Ross Baraka, called, the Mayor's Mentors Initiative, modeled after the President's Mentors Initiative. And I said, Mayor Baraka, what is this about? He says, this is about I'm going to die someday, and I have to leave a better future for this city and for the world. So there's Enrique, tú sabes, esto es de nuestros hijos y nuestras hijas. It's about our sons and daughters. And what 3-4 generations says, hey, there was an educational crisis, there was a disconnected youth crisis, and what did you do about it? And what's the legacy you're going to be doing? I think Brandon, I was talking to him outside. I said, this is about him. Whitney Houston used to say, children of the future, let them lead the way.
And the Reverend will now sing it for us. Rev?
I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way.
Okay, that's
right. So, and so here we are. We are at a moment. Can we do more? Yes. But I really believe there's a movement. We were in Orlando, Florida, and we had 1,200 men sign up to mentor in a church. 1,200 men saying, where do I sign up? What do I have to do? That wasn't happening 10 or 12 in a Latino evangelical church, Pentecostal church. And so there's a lot going on to celebrate. And the second thing is, let's not be overwhelmed by the challenge. It's too big, so I can't do anything. No, I think that disempowerment should not exist. We can do something, we are doing something, and we're going to continue to do something.
And talking about doing something, we spoke briefly just before the program started that there is a chapter with a church in South Florida, where I'm from Miami. And watching the documentary, it's so sad to see these young kids saying they're going to school and they're dodging bullets. To see one of the kids in the film say that his grandfather was shot to death and that he had to live through that. That should disgust all of us. It disgusts me. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and beautiful city of Chicago. It saddens me every time I see the news. Every other weekend, it seems like there's kids getting shot. I live now in the beautiful city of Miami. Just this past weekend, we had a drive-by shooting, and it's just too often, Michael, that there's a stray bullet that catches kids while they're sleeping in our inner city, be it Liberty City, be it the Pork and Beans Project in Miami, and that's just naming Miami. But every city in the United States has their pork and beans. Every city in Miami has in the United States has their overtowns. And the councilwoman mentioned something which really, and we spoke a little bit about this as well before we started, that made a lot of sense to me. When you mentioned the coalition between police officers and the community, that's great community policing. I'm also a reserve City of Miami police officer. I volunteer 20 hours a month. I was a full-time police officer before I got into broadcasting, and I left police work to do broadcasting in 2000. But police work's still very dear to my heart, and I'm blessed to be where I'm at today, and I am who I am today because of my experience as a police officer. So I think I owe it to my city. I owe it to the youth of the beautiful city of Miami to be there and be a positive role model for them as well. And so many times I pull up to a scene and people recognize me from TV or for radio, specifically the Latinos, and things change. The narrative changes, and the president has talked about changing that narrative. You mentioned also, Councilwoman, about celebrities getting involved. I'm very proud that a couple weeks ago we got my friend Mark Anthony to do a big donation for the Miami Police Athletic League. And these are just small little things where I think that we should really ask our celebrities and athletics and everybody, athletes, to step up to the plate, because these are the people that young America is really looking up to, right? We've seen on the internet also different videos where police officers get out of their squad cars and they're playing basketball, they're playing football. I think that's a great example, Michael. Maybe is there something more we can be doing at local levels with law enforcement? I think that this documentary, honestly, Discovery should team up with police departments all across the United States, and all police officers should watch this, because this is the spirit of what policing should be. Advocating positive thing and good community policing, and creating and changing the narrative, like the president said, and creating a healthy atmosphere. That's the spirit, I think, of My Brother's Keeper, and I think that we should be, Michael, what more can we be doing to get this to our local law enforcement?
Yeah, so one of the My Brother's Keeper is based on these 6 milestones that determine that are critical indicators of long-term success. So starting at entering kindergarten ready to learn, reading at grade level by 3rd grade, graduating high school ready for college and career, actually getting post-secondary training and education, entering the workforce, and then reducing violence and providing a second chance. And so that reducing violence and providing a second chance milestone is inspiring all sorts of great work across the country. We've seen expansion of police athletic leagues. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, Malenka, were you here for the Youth and Law Enforcement Champions? Yeah. Was that last week?
It was.
The time is running. It was last, and so maybe you could talk about it, but I mean, I've been to dozens of My Brother's Keeper local action summits all across the country. One of the first people I see? Uniformed law enforcement officers. They are there. They have strong relationships with the communities, and they're figuring out how to work together. But maybe you can talk about some of these partnerships we're lifting up.
Yeah, sure. So, it was just last week. We were honoring, I think it was about 6 youth and law enforcement partnerships that really exemplified the type of work that you're talking about. So meaningful engagement with youth, where folks are working together in a collaborative fashion and learning from each other. So it's not just a one-way direction, but it was an inspiring event. And I will say that so those were with no because of course I'm going to have to put in a cops plug. So those folks were picked just for the wonderful work that they're doing, and it was a very representative group of folk from across the country. But I will say, COPS also, through our grant programs, is supporting specifically some of those partnerships, not necessarily the ones that were honored this week. But we've got a program that's right now running out of Texas. I'm going to mess up the name, but it's the Police Academy Service Network, and I can tweak that name if I don't have it right. But it's really a 15-week curriculum program where we're at risk or at hope. Is that what you? Yes,
at promise.
Yes, at promise youth are brought in to meet with these law enforcement officers, and they really have an engaged curriculum around a number of topics: bullying, conflict resolution. Also, it's like information sharing. So the police are explaining to them kind of what it is that they're doing when they're doing stops or field searches and that sort of thing, so that there's a level of information and candid conversation about, reaction to some of that stuff and feelings in the community. So that's something positive that we're trying to promote, as well as the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officers has a grant that they've received from us to push forward with the task force recommendations, and their project similarly focuses on making these connections with youth and strengthening them. I will just say also one of the things that the COPS office is doing, because a lot of times when we talk about this stuff, a lot of the focus is on the kids, what the kids need to be doing and that sort of thing. And I will say that there is a responsibility, as I'm sure all of us are aware and appreciate, for our institutions like law enforcement agencies and others to really examine their role. And obviously there have been, it hardly needs to be said, but there has been a distressed relationship. That's a relationship that's not just it's gotten a lot of attention this year, but it's rooted in the history of our law enforcement agencies from enforcing Jim Crow laws. And part of this conversation has to be sort of acknowledging that role. And so police officers that are on the beat today, they are certainly not responsible for that history, but they're accountable. I should say it this way: they are not accountable for it, but they're accountable to that history. And we've been doing a number of trainings, fair and impartial trainings, around addressing implicit biases. So it's not that people are walking around, now some people are that are just actually have explicit biases, but all of us unfortunately have these implicit biases, and you really need to have intensive training to identify that in yourself. And then you need, from the leadership level and law enforcement agencies, policies and procedures to account for the fact that that can be happening, so that their early warning systems to be tracking through data, different contexts, disproportionate contexts, and that sort of thing. So we're working sort of on the whole gamut.
You mentioned the word focus. Obviously, my brother's keeper focuses on young men, but young women can also benefit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Mike can probably speak to that too, but you should know that the administration and the White House certainly, but all of us throughout the administration are focused on our girls too. We're not planning on leaving them behind.
Yeah. I would just say the president spoke at the Congressional Black Caucus Phoenix Awards dinner actually just last week again.
There's a lot going on in Phoenix, huh?
There's this actually not in Phoenix. They call it the Phoenix Dinner, which is a nice coincidence. And he actually gave a speech that was a tribute to women that have been on the movement. And he talked about the fact that there's no way that Mrs. Obama and his household, that is a majority women, is going to allow him to forget women. And so My Brother's Keeper, while it's really examining the challenges that we're seeing with boys of color, every single thing we do is about expanding opportunity for all of those young people that might be marginalized. And I was just with the director of the New York My Brother's Keeper program called the Young Men's Initiative, and he said 90% of their programs are open to and have girls that are participating. And so we're really excited to see, all of the work Justice is doing and Ed is doing is really opening doors and providing opportunities for all of our young people that need those clear pathways.
Excellent. We'll open up the mic for questions from anybody out in the audience. And Valentina's on her Twitter feed as well, so if you have a question for those watching the live stream with the hashtag #MyBrothersKeeper, hashtag #MyBrothersKeeper on Twitter. She's monitoring that Twitter feed there. Questions? Don't be bashful. English, Spanish. If it's in Mandarin, the Reverend can, right?
We have a question over here.
If you would tell us your name, where you're from, and your question, and to who.
Good evening. My name is Berto Aguayo. I'm also from Chicago, from the south side of Chicago.
All right, the Windy City.
Yeah. This documentary, I just came because it was part of our program. I'm part of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute with my friends here. And it was a nice coincidence because this really hit home. Being in the south side of Chicago, you face a lot of challenges. I myself was, gang affiliated from 13 to 17. And then after a few transformational experiences, I founded a mentoring program along with 10 other seniors in my high school for underclassmen. Now, this program went on for about 4 years, and all we had was a gym, an open gym on Sundays, and we had about 40 kids enroll. And even after I was gone for about 4 years, people still came to this program just because we had an open gym. Then I went on to work for a state representative, and we also founded a mentoring program. But then what I really started to see as a challenge was connecting all these people who want to do great things to structural support from either the local governments or the federal government, because I never had heard of like My Brother's Keeper, and I'm from the South Side of Chicago. You would think that where the president's from, I would have known about this initiative. So I'm wondering, how can we connect people who want to do good things, who want to be role models, and connect them and provide them that structural support that we need and that financial support that they need?
First, brother, congratulations on your leadership. I wanna affirm you. You inspire me. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I think there's several things. I think there are local chapters of My Brother's Keepers all around the country. Cities that are partnering. So Phoenix, Orlando, Miami, New York. I met with the Young Men's Initiative leader in New York City, and Mayor de Blasio is investing in that. So what I would say is, tap into, there are summits, local action summits in the cities around the country, particularly cities that are disproportionately impacted with an education gap and a work gap for young men and boys of color. So that's one. Look for those cities. And on the whitehouse.gov page and on the private sector, My Brother's Keeper Alliance, there's always updates. Where are these summits happening? Who's a part of that? So just tap into that. Follow MBK Alliance on Twitter and all that. So that be tapped into the information. Secondly, I think that what Michael Smith said is, you're doing it. The question is, how not just you exposed to what the government is doing, how are they exposed to what you're doing? What are the entree ramps into this conversation? So the way I entered into the conversation is, I saw that My Brother's Keeper was doing something, and I quickly called my local mayor and particularly the education department, because that's where our area of strength is. And I said, look, the Hispanic Evangelical Church wants to partner with you on the education piece and on the recidivism piece. And they said, people want to help us? and they quickly brought us to a meeting. And I think so that it's finding the entry level points. And after that, I want to come shake your hand after this is over.
So I agree, Kate Geiger from Phoenix, I agree that mayor's offices are a wonderful area because the president challenged mayors, but almost every federal agency seems to have a link. So the Department of Labor Job Corps is very active in our group, in our community. The Corporation for National and Community Service with AmeriCorps and others is very active. But the best thing is that the White House has really let us sort of take the My Brother's Keeper mantle and run with it. And as we've looked particularly for business partners, they've been very excited about joining as part of a national initiative. So we spoke about disconnected youth earlier. Unfortunately, Phoenix is #1. We have more disconnected youth than any other community right now. But we've stepped up with that challenge, and groups like Starbucks has been a partner with us, trying to be an employer for disconnected youth, and they like being part of a national campaign as well. So it helps them because they are throughout our country, and it's impacting every community, and so that they can get involved and step up. And I think you can go out in your community and use the My Brother's Keeper mantle to recruit businesses or churches or your local rec programs to be partners as well. So I'm grateful that My Brother's Keeper has empowered us in that way. And it's been a wonderful experience to come together with businesses, with the police department, with elected officials. Most of the time when we get training, it's just people who do what you do for a living. But I had the opportunity to participate in My Brother's Keeper panel that the White House did with the Congressional Black Caucus, also last week. And it was the first time I was sitting next to a police commander from Phoenix where we were talking about what we were going to do, and we were able to take ideas from other communities as well. So we learned one of the best practices that was alluded to earlier in this, when you do training for police officers, make sure that young people are a part of it and that they have informal conversations. So we're taking that idea from another community. Because of the My Brother's Keeper platform, we were able to learn about it and run with it. So you take it and make it your own.
We have a question right here.
Thank you, Councilwoman. How cool would it be to go to Starbucks and get a My Brother's Keeper latte and have, part of that proceed go to the President's Alliance? What would be in the mind? That's a good question. How are you, ma'am?
Hi, my name is Dr. Eileen Marty, and I congratulate all of you. I think this is a fantastic program that you're all doing, and I love the movie. Very exciting. the second chances part, that's what that gets me very interested, because some of these kids, they make mistakes and they end up in jail, and they might be older than 18 when they're in jail. And then no matter where they want to be employed, they've got to, oh, I've got a criminal record. And then it's hard to get a job, even if they get the education, even if they try to do something, because now, especially in this digital age, you cannot escape your history, okay? So what, on a policy perspective from the Justice Department or mayor perspective, et cetera, presidential perspective, is being done to incentivize people who've gone through a program, they're ready to get back into the workforce, they have a record. How are they, you know, in other words, are you going to do like a work study equivalent where they, you know, you're going to let that business that takes a risk, you're going to give them some kind of a cut in their taxes or something to make that business take a risk and let this person, you know, try again and succeed in life?
Yeah, so I would just say, if it hasn't been clear in the past couple weeks, the president is fired up about second chances and reentry, as is our incredible attorney general. This, I guess in July, I had the chance to join Attorney General Lynch and Arnie Duncan at a correctional facility in Maryland, where Secretary Duncan was launching a program called Second Chance Pell. So 20 years ago, Congress made it impossible for prisons and universities to work together in order to make sure that incarcerated individuals got access to grants. And so now, through an experimental pilot program, we're getting hundreds of applications where universities and correctional institutions can partner together to get Pell Grants so that they can create university-level programming for the folks that are incarcerated, so that when they finish their term, they can come back in society as full productive members. And that's just one example. You're also...
You have not answered my question. I'm going to talk about now they got their education. Can they get a job?
So she asked about jobs coming in. So there's lots of, and Malenga, you could probably address this too. So before I took on this job, running My Brother's Keeper, I ran something called the Social Innovation Fund, where we're trying to invest in evidence-based interventions for low-income communities. And so one of the programs that we invest in is something called Center for Employment Opportunities. And it's a federal grant that works with folks that are getting out of being incarcerated. It connects them with a job right away. It gives them money within their first week. And so we're looking at all sorts of programs like this across the country that are making reentry a little bit easier. The other thing that we're doing, the president called on companies to continue this movement to ban the box. So you've seen Starbucks, you've seen Koch brothers, you've seen Walmart. Ban that box where you have to check it to say, I've either been arrested or I have a felony. And so we're saying maybe move that a little further down the line so you can meet the person, find out if he or she has the skills that they need before you use that as something to take them out. And so we're seeing a great movement. Malenka, I don't know if you want to address this as well.
So you should, sort of a lot of the work that the administration has been doing and that Michael's been describing has been under the rubric of something called the Federal Interagency Reentry Council. And that's been a very powerful working group of agencies across the administration that are really putting their resources together and their kind of policy thinking hats on how to address these issues. So there are existing federal incentives to that you sort of asked about. There's the work opportunity tax credit, there's the federal bonding program, and these are, you know, programs that have existed for some time. But there's been a lot of work, and there's actually a website that kind of talks about the measure of work, the work that and the resources that Michael's described. You know, the Department of Labor and Department of Justice together through the Second Chance Act and the grant funding that has come through has a lot of resources on the table that have gone to partner organizations that really help land people get the training and help and provide a pathway into opportunities that they may otherwise have been denied because of that record. But there have also been at the federal level, you know, the Small Business Administration had some regulations. We really have been very thoughtful about the barriers that the federal government may have to people with criminal records, so that as we're advancing this platform, that we're being mindful that we're doing the same thing and being very thoughtful that any restrictions that we have are in fact, you know, appropriately calibrated to whatever the opportunity is that's being offered. So so that's just one example. The Small Business Administration last year removed a restriction that was precluding people from giving some access to some of the funding that's available for minority businesses, and that I'm talking about it in general terms, but the specifics should be available on that website just to kind of learn a little bit more about what we're doing. But like Michael said, I mean, everybody is all in for this, and it's not just going to happen at the federal level. I mean, part of that is the bully pulpit and trying to encourage jurisdictions at the state and local level to do the right thing too. But yeah, that's some of it.
Questions? Yeah.
And our next question comes from
Nancy Navarro. I'm a council member from Montgomery County, Maryland, just right here, not too far away. So a lot of the conversation has been focused on this notion of the justice and the interaction with police. And so I'm really curious about how has this initiative informed, for example, the Department of Education vis-a-vis early childhood and how important it is, because we don't want students to come into kindergarten not ready to learn and with an achievement gap. That's number one. Also, this can really inform, I think, institutions of higher learning, higher education, universities, of how they prepare teachers. It was very powerful to see the role that teachers played and the relationship that they established with their students. But, you know, one of the things that we're struggling with is this notion that in our universities, teachers are not necessarily prepared to come into a classroom and address a lot of those challenges, whether it be trauma, whether it be poverty, you know, safety. So I think this initiative has the potential to really inform how we need to maybe tweak to curriculums at universities and really truly be a catalyst for that. So I'm wondering if that has been a focus of this particular initiative. And also Montgomery County as a jurisdiction, we banned the box. So that's another very important piece.
And Montgomery County is a My Brother's Keeper community.
Yes, it is.
So we've got Marco Davis, who is the head of the White House, or the deputy of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for, it's a really long title.
Davis.
Educational Excellence for Hispanics. And so he could probably talk to you a little bit more about this afterwards. But oh, you're a commit. So you were just seeding the question. So what I would say for other people is that, you know, My Brother's Keeper is based on these 6 milestones. 4 of them have to do directly with K through 12 education, and also starting at higher education as well. And we're set up where we have an interagency task force and working groups. Department of Education is running almost all of these. So, I mean, there are public social media campaigns like Read Where You Are, which we did this summer, encouraging people to think about summer learning loss. There was just a word gap toolkit that was released by the Department of Education. You've seen a lot of work on teacher hiring initiatives and diversification of teachers across the country. And so it's actually been a major focus. So much of this, there's that saying from Frederick Douglass, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Not that it's impossible, because all of us do it all the time. We give people second chances, but we're trying to bolster and lift up and edify our children as early as possible so that we can give them a head start instead of trying to course correct once they fall down. So huge component of our work.
Questions?
next question.
Hi, I'm Julia Martin. I'm used to saying Julia Martin, so I'm changing it up. I'm an intern at the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, and I actually have a comment directed at your question, and so this is like an op for us. We just worked on a program called the Bright Spots all across the country, and it was 232 that I believe it came out to, and our initiative focuses on five different like fields. So it's early learning, K through 12 and college access, college completion, STEM, and Latino teacher recruitment. And so these Bright Spots are a resource for everybody here and for everybody watching at home, hopefully. If you go online, if you type in White House Initiative, Bright Spots, they all come up. And the point of this is to highlight programs that are working in these 5 areas and that are doing work in their communities. So you can look it up. You can look it up alphabetically. There's a map that'll show you where they are. And most of these resources are free. Unfortunately, they don't specifically focus on criminal justice. I know that that's a lot of what we're talking about here, but it's a lot less intimidating than having to call your mayor's office for a resource, right?
That's not intimidating.
So if you go online, like I said, it's an easy Google search, and there's so many resources, and it's from cradle to career. So all our interns worked really hard on it too. So.
And again,
thank you.
whitehouse.gov, and how will we look it up one more time? bright spots. Very well.
Next question.
And the next question comes from?
Hi, I'm Tomas. I'm a recent graduate from Florida International University.
All right,
I was
Florida
actually-
in the house.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a university based in Miami, Florida, and I was one of the fortunate stories enough to have parents who worked hard enough to give me that opportunity and put me in a position to do so. But I guess my question is, I'm not necessarily sure that I've seen much happen at the university level in terms of my brother's keeper. Now I understand there's a bunch of programs in universities that do these type of things, and universities and higher level education is not necessarily the end goal, but it definitely is a milestone in terms of getting to where you want to go. So I was wondering if universities have some sort of chapters that are student run, because I think a big part of it is not necessarily getting funds or getting grants, but knowing that opportunity is out there to make a difference. Students understanding that they have the opportunity to do so. So I was wondering if there's some sort of chapters on a university-wide level. So,
yeah. Look, I think this is an all-in project, right? It's all in, and so criminal justice reform, educational reform. As a person who serves immigrant communities, immigration reform, DACA, DAPA, all of that is part of the. We didn't get here in a day. We're not going to solve it in a day. I think NALIC, the coalition that I'm happy to serve, we have something called Nuestro Futuro, our future, where we're actually working with some of our college kids to start mentoring chapters to local schools around those universities and or colleges and say, hey, look, we're here. We made it, and it's not, a 40-something-year-old man. It's a 19-year-old college sophomore, Latina or Latino. It's a 20-year-old college junior, or 25-year-old, or 35-year-old who said, I'm going to try again. And so that the faces and the names sound familiar, and you start that. It's student run. And where we have the churches wrap around, support that. I think those are the kinds of initiatives, right? My Brother's Keeper is a national initiative that's trying to build to scale the best practices. That's how they're trying to build to scale some of those best practices. But the truth is, in my experience, is the best practices start en la tierra, grassroots. Like this young man from Chicago, like you in Florida International University, like so many of these CHC people and volunteers. And so you start doing that, and then you'd be surprised how many colleges and universities around the country are going to follow your model. With social media, it doesn't take a lot to start something and replicate it across the country. So if you want to start something at FIU and say, we're going to start Latinas and Latinos mentoring local high schools, or even, the truth is, the biggest challenge is early childhood education. We can do that, and we'll come along and support you. That's just for instance.
In Phoenix, we are really trying to partner with our college system on college completion. So we have about 50% of our Latino students graduating right now, and even lower numbers among our African American students, and we really want to change that. And so we have students who are advising us on what city, county, and state government can do to change that. And that's been really eye-opening. We've talked to students who said, but for $200 more in financial aid, he would have stayed in school. And that's a fixable problem, and we need to hear that. So the more you can tell your stories, that helps this initiative become much stronger. So Arizona State University has a whole office that partners with students to try to make it easier for students to stay in school. And the city of Phoenix learned from that. And we started a couple different initiatives, starting at the high school level with our College Depot, which helps students apply. And then if you end up disconnected, we have a different initiative through our library that tries to help you get back into school and overcome whatever obstacles you have. And some of the obstacles have been really heartbreaking. I mean, students who dropped out to care for mom who had cancer. And it is better for all of us if we can invest in that young man and get him back into school. So lots of leadership roles. I love the idea of chapters. I had not thought of that. And perhaps the first one will be born today.
I think we have the chairman of the National Organization of MBK College Chapters.
I thought Michael was going to sing now. You already sang, Rev. I thought Michael was going to get to sing. Another question from?
So I think we have one last one, and then just because of time, we're going to have to cut it out. But here you go.
Hi, my name is Mayra Cani. Is this on?
It's on. We hear you, Mayra.
My name is Mayra Canizales. I'm from Oakland, California, and I'm a DC public school principal. And the beauty of My Brother's Keeper is that it's really allowing for communities and cities to take ownership of what is happening, right? Because what Phoenix needs is different from LA, is different from New York. The burden of that is the systems and the structures around the success of these programs, because some will not go well. And that's just the bottom line, right? You can invest in people, you can invest in the programming. So what is the systematic approach to making sure that we receive some type of report in the next 2 years so that it goes beyond 2017? So cities can learn from other cities who did it well, because you want to create these best practices and these structures. So it's okay, right? Like, it's okay if some cities don't get the results, but how are you creating some type of report for the rest of the cities to look at to figure out how do we sustain this beyond 2017?
So great question. You know, we've got to come to a place where we understand that good is not good enough, and we've got to invest where there's real evidence of impact. So we've actually already done our first year My Brother's Keeper report. So if you go to wh.gov/MBK, we did a report looking at what's happening in the private sector, policy, and in communities. And when we did that report, it was more about the organization that was getting set up and the forums that were happening. So by the time we do our next report, you'll actually start to see some real meaningful, tangible action that's happening on the ground. We also pull together, and maybe this is a challenge, we actually pull together our My Brother's Keeper communities on almost a monthly basis through webinars and conference calls. We just did one last week, but that's probably just the organizers and not getting down to the folks that are doing a lot of work in neighborhoods. So that's actually a good challenge for me to think about how we can do it. And then, you know, to speak for the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which I shouldn't do since I don't work for them, but what I know about their work, they're really investing heavily in helping to build data infrastructure and data dashboards. And so when you took the My Brother's Keeper Community Challenge, you committed to your community and to the president that you were going to track and measure what works and that you were going to make that public. And so My Brother's Keeper Alliance is helping communities to think about how they can do that in a more systematic way. So President Obama has really tried to create a what works agenda, and that is really core to the work of My Brother's Keeper. So not just investing in what's good, but what's really moving the needle. And I've got a good challenge from you to make sure that we're doing a better job of sharing that more wide.
I believe we have run out of time. Thank you all for coming. Catherine Vargas, muchas gracias por la invitación. Thank you so very much. Thank you all for coming. And how about a big round of applause if you accept President Obama's My Brother's Keeper Challenge. Muchas gracias. Thank you.